This is Mr. Gillum, and today we're going to learn about completing the square. Now, I can't stress how very important this is, but before we really get into the thick of it, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to do some more equations with square roots, okay, where we're going to have a quantity squared, and we're going to square root both sides. Now, this is something we've done in the past, okay, but specifically today, first we're going to factor, then we're going to take the square root, and then we're going to solve, okay. And for today, the problems, they're going to be perfect trinomial squares. And so that's what's going to make it nice about factoring them, is that I will be able to take the square root of both sides. Okay, now this is a huge skill. Okay, this is something that it's a little confusing at first, but we're going to spend 2 days on it and we're going to get it. Okay, so for example here, I want to solve this equation, and what I want to do is I want to solve it by using the square root. Okay, I'm going to solve by using the square root. Okay, so step one is factor. I'm going to factor this thing. Okay, for today, your equations will all be perfect trinomial squares, where the first one will be a perfect square and the last number will be a perfect square. And we've talked about these before. If there's a minus sign, we know it's going to be a parentheses minus with a squared. Okay. However, if you're not convinced that it's a perfect trinomial square, we can factor it the long way. All right. I'm thinking of two numbers that multiply to get 16 and add up to -8. -4 times -4 equals 16. -4 plus -4 equals -8. So I know if I didn't recognize it as a perfect trinomial square right away, I could say x minus 4 times x minus 4 equals 25. Okay, and you're going to see why I've been having you write these two terms that are the same as a quantity squared here in a second. All right. Like I said before, these are always going to be perfect trinomial squares today for your equations, okay, because we're going to build the skill that we're going to need here in the near future. Okay, this is really x minus 4 quantity squared. Now, we talked about that on some of the quizzes. Not everyone wrote it as the quantity squared, okay? We need to start doing that, okay? Every single problem, because the benefit of that is this, okay? I know I have a quantity squared on the left-hand side. And so now what I can do to solve is I can take the square root of both sides. All right, it's not so obvious to take the square root of both sides in this step right here. However, when I have a quantity squared, we've practiced this, okay? You can take the square root of both sides. X minus 4, the square root basically cancels out the squared, equals plus or minus, I know the square root of 25 is 5. Okay, and so from there now I can just solve for x. That's what the goal is, to get x by itself. I can add 4. X equals 4 plus or minus 5. Okay, and really this means x equals 4 plus 5, or x equals 4 minus 5. So really x equals 9, or x equals -1. Okay, I'm going to tell you again, this is a very important skill for what's going to come up here later in this chapter. All right, so today we're going to practice solving these equations by factoring and square rooting both sides, and then solving for the variable. Okay. So once again, I'm telling you right now, they're all perfect trinomial squares. So this should be a perfect square, and this should be a perfect square. And together, since it's a plus plus, it's going to make an x plus 3 quantity squared equals 36. Okay, and if you're not convinced, 3 times 3 is 9. 3 plus 3 is 6. That's going to be x plus 3, x plus 3. Together, it makes x plus 3 quantity squared. Okay, it will always be a quantity squared. If this first sign is a minus, it'll be a minus in your parentheses. If it's a plus, if it's plus plus, it's going to be a plus in your parentheses. From here, I can square root both sides. X plus 3 equals plus or minus. Don't forget the plus or minus, please. Remember, whenever you square root 4th root, 6th root, any even root, both sides of an equation, you have to have the plus minus on there because there's actually two solutions. 6 times 6 equals 36, or -6 times -6 equals 36. And now I'm just going to solve for x. X equals -3 plus or minus 6. Now remember, whatever you add to both sides is not behind the plus or minus, it's in front of the plus or minus. Okay, only what you took the square root of is a plus or minus. So really we have these two solutions, -3 plus 6, x equals -3 minus 6. So I know x could equal 3, or x could equal -9. And these are my two solutions here. Okay, Now, there's a big difference between finding zeros and finding solutions. When you're finding zeros, okay, there's two variables present, like x and y. When you're finding a solution of the equation, there's just one variable present. You can solve for what that variable is always equal to make that statement true. Okay, now let's look at this one. Once again, we have a perfect trinomial square. We have a minus and a plus. I know this is going to be x minus 5 quantity squared. The square root of 25 is 5, the square root of x squared is x, and that's equal to 1. And once again, I can square root both sides. Once you have that quantity squared, that square root and the squared are basically, they do the opposite of one another. X minus 5 equals plus or minus. Please remember the square root of 1 is 1, everybody. It's just 1. 1 times 1 is 1. Okay, or negative 1 times negative 1 is 1. Please don't forget your plus minus. And then we're just going to solve from there. Add 5 to both sides. X equals 5 plus or minus 1. So x could equal 5 plus 1, or x could equal 5 minus 1. So x could equal 6, or x could equal 4. And there's my two solutions. All right. Let's look at one more. Okay. And one more time. It's a perfect trinomial square on the left-hand side, and they all will be today because we're building this skill about square roots. This is a big skill. We need this. Okay. So once again, this is a perfect square. That's 12 times 12. This is a perfect square. X times x. So I'm going to go ahead and start my parentheses. X minus 12. Quantity squared equals 100. Okay, and you can do it the long way if you want, but I know this is negative 12 plus negative 12 is going to be negative 24. Okay, now I can square root both sides. That cancels out. I have x minus 12 equals plus or minus 10. From there, I add 12 to both sides. X equals 12 plus or minus 10. So x equals 12 plus 10, or x equals 12 minus 10. So x can equal 22, or x can equal 2. Okay, there's two numbers that I can plug in that equation to make it a true statement. All right.